Tell the story of like your DMT trip because it's like it's a bucket list thing.
Oh, which one? I've smoked it a couple hundred times.
Double 100. Wow. Okay, well,
Yeah, because the first time I had done other stuff before, but
yeah.
first time I did it, it was like it was really a Pandora's box moment or a red pill moment. And I thought I had been pretty red pilled because I had taken a bunch of other stuff at really high doses, which tends to make you feel like you know something. And DMT just burned the house down for me.
Okay.
It was such a complete ontological shift. So
So instead of sort of pinpointing like a specific story, could you maybe go into some recurrent themes from those experiences and then some insight or some lessons that you've taken from what you experienced into the way you look at the normal human experience?
you can look up the term hyperbolic geometry. Hyperbolic geometry gets you pretty close to the kinds of things that you see there. So they're mathematical expressions. It's a realm which seems to be made of higher than three-dimensional space. It's hard to explain what that means until you see it, but you get a sense that there's kind of information and complexity nested within itself there. It's very fractal. It's very colorful. If you've seen Alex Gray's work, you have some indication of the kinds of things that are there.
Yeah.
Although Alex's work is not, for me at least, as I experience it, a literal representation of what's there. He's being a little bit iconic with it of human forms to make it more relatable because it is utterly alien. I remember after the first time I did it, I felt I knew what the word alien meant. And before that, I realized I had not known what alien meant. In the community, they say it's a complete reality replacement, which none of the other substances do that. They leave you at least a little bit in this world. It may be very altered at a high dose, but you're still here. You're gone completely on that stuff. There isn't a shred of anything which you can notice, which is you can map onto anything that's ever happened to you prior to that moment. And the fascinating thing is you would think after you've done it a bunch of times, that's not true because you have a kind of familiarity with it. It's not true. 30 seconds into every single time you do it, one, there's a kind of holy shit moment. This stuff actually exists because some part of your brain doesn't want to accept the fact that 20 seconds away, anytime you wish to pick up the pipe, you can just meet aliens. I mean, that's totally a thing that can happen. It's no bullshit whatsoever. It's literally a 20-second experience away anytime you pick up the pipe. So for me, the most difficult thing, actually, the trip are extremely intense. So there's a difficulty in that. But really the difficult thing for me the first time I came back was there's no way that there's just a little bag of this stuff which you can just buy. Like it doesn't map onto any map of the world I have that you can just buy some stuff. You can just inhale it a couple times and just be shot into an alien realm. Because if that's true, this would be the only conversation humanity would be having with itself. That we don't have to ask questions about other dimensions and other life forms. You can just show yourself anytime you want that that's true. So I had not a kind of breakdown, but it was like an ontological I surely, how can this actually be true? So I waited like 4 hours and I smoked it again because I just needed to see for myself because would this really happen? And it totally is. It's all of it's just there again. And I realized it's just nonchalant. As many times as you do it, everything is there. So so you meet beings there. If you smoke a high enough dose of it, basically you reach these places where these kind of, some people just refer to them as the entities.
Yeah.
They don't really have names. Some people say the gods of human tradition are sometimes imports maybe, or indications of these beings that are there. Maybe, maybe not, I'm not sure. But there are entities there of different kinds. They are spectacularly strange. They are unbelievably unusual. And very varied in form. And they also sometimes communicate with you. It's telepathic, so it isn't that you hear them exactly. Although you sometimes hear a kind of ringing tone and then you feel like you understand something. I'm not sure if the two are related or there's just a ringing tone in that realm, but there's communication there. So my sense of what reality is after having done it that many times, one is I know I for sure don't know what's actually going on. I think it's not possible for a human being to understand. I think even if you had all the information in front of you somehow, we still wouldn't be capable of understanding what it meant. But my sense is that there are different realms of existence, more crude up to more refined. That is more perfect, less chaotic. We find ourselves somewhere in the middle, obviously. It's a pretty imperfect realm, but there's whispers of divinity there because we can sit down and have conversations like this. So it's not really in the lower forms of life, definitely not in the upper. This is not a new story. Actually, human traditions have said this for a long time, but in these higher realms are definitely more perfect. Everything there is like mathematically precise, very dynamic, very creative. And you have a sense somehow, and I have even had this communication, that they're responsible for the creation of this realm. That this realm is somehow nested within these higher realities. There was a second part to your question. I don't recall what it was. Sorry.
Yeah, it was so from these experiences, what are the key maybe insights, takeaways, lessons that then go into how you approach and view the human world that we live in when we're not in these states? I mean, you sort of alluded to some bits there, but I'm interested if there are any sort of things that bits of insight that helped you process parts of this life from what you experienced in.
Oh, yeah, sure. So there's a whole spectrum of strange stuff that goes on with DMT. So the super fascinating thing about it is you can take a really small dose of it, super small, like 4 milligrams or something. It will not get you anywhere near this realm I'm talking about. You have to do much more. But personal revelations can happen at the really small doses. So very bizarre things. So I've had instances where I smoked it and I'll think of a person and then I'll realize how that person sees me. I just suddenly seem to understand what I look like from this other person's perspective. Like someone in my life, someone I know, can be close or not close. And that's all the trip really contained. There's always the little faint math stuff going on that doesn't get too strong if you don't smoke too much. But sometimes it'll be like your brain just gets a thought just inserted into it. And you suddenly see something very personal, very grounded like that. And then up from there, the more you increase the dose, the more impersonal the revelations become. Until you end up in some space where you kind of have to do it to understand what this means, but you just get a sense that all of nature is really just a processing of information. And that life is a kind of mechanism which is basically performing a kind of computation as far as I can tell. I think there's a kind of experiment going on, and these higher dimensional beings do things like create universes in the same way that we use particle colliders. Like we hit stuff together to infer what happens when you do that, and from their level of understanding, they can actually instantiate, universes.
Wow. So there's a
Because you can, and I mean that quite literally, you can actually sometimes have images where you just see this constellation of universes, like in a grid. They're all just sort of sitting there together.
Yeah, I mean,
you get a sense that you just belong in one of them, and that from their perspective, these are like, like little vials. They're checking who knows what at their level. What on earth is it that they still don't know? But I get a sense that this realm is nested in the reality created by higher beings. And I'd be a little careful there because I'm not necessarily. There's a temptation when you start to get into this to start bringing in religious themes, and of course for good reasons because it's tones of creation. But I think you have to be careful not to be simplistic about the traditional good and bad stories of religion. I think whatever they are is like transmoral. I think they're simply in a realm of being where we can't comprehend what they're doing.
Yeah, so there's so much that I want to sort of break down and go into there. I've got a lot of questions. Some about your experience, some about your theories about things that I've thought about. So firstly, I want to talk about time perception, because I've heard that the DMT experience is 10 minutes, something like that?
10's a long trip, actually. For me, it times out at around 7. If you're gone longer than 12, that for me is like very long.
And I'm wondering, how is your time perception skewed when you're in that state? Does it feel like, I can imagine it will probably feel like a lot longer than that, but give me a little bit just quickly of what that's like, because yeah, I've heard it's almost like you feel like you've lived a lifetime and it's been 10 minutes. Like,
yeah, definitely. So there is an extreme time dilation in that you're just sure it's dramatically more than 7 minutes. And also just that whatever that other place is, it's kind of not happening in time. Time doesn't seem to make much sense there, because if you smoke it enough times to get a little bit calm, the issue when you do it the first times is you're scared, frankly. It is scary to do it. It's not calm. I don't mean terrifying, but it's just so unlike anything that's happened that your brain and body just goes into a kind of fight flight. So it's hard to sort of just calm down and study what's happening. But after you do it enough times to a little bit sort of get your wind, I get the sense that time's not really happening there. Because if you just observe it, there just seems to be these kind of machines made out of math and language and shapes. Those words don't seem to make much sense, but there's a kind of like factory there. And there's machines just seem to be spinning and they're creating objects, and the objects disappear and new ones show up. And I don't get a sense that there's anything like a clock running there, that whatever dimension this is not experiencing entropy. Because it also depends on what you mean by time. So I'm referring to the actual physical time as physicists measure it, which is just a breakdown of systems of entropy. And I get a sense that things don't fall apart there. I put it that way. Because here we measure time by the falling apart of things. Things irradiating away is what tells us that things are, moving in a direction of time. And I get a sense that that's not true there.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And a point I want to dig into a little bit is, how has these experiences changed your view on mortality? and the end of human life. And I'll leave that broadly for you to go into your ideas, and then I might come in with some thoughts that I have. But yeah, how has it changed your view of mortality?
Well, I don't think that you actually die, but I also don't think that there's ever such a thing as being born. I think whatever this process is doesn't really work that way. There's some strange human tendency to put boundaries on things. We like starts and stops, beginnings and ends. I just don't think that nature is a system that's sloppy enough to just magically start something and then somehow it just sort of magically goes away again. I don't think that nature does that. There's just a kind of causal chain which keeps going where things keep moving through different energy states. Now, if you're referring to something a little bit more personal like a soul, I'm not sure about that. So the persistence of some existence of an individual person, like personality after death, no, definitely not. I think that information is stored in the brain, and the brain's physical and the brain dies like the body. So if you mean, are you as a person going to somehow keep going with your like memories of what you used to do? No, I don't think so. I don't think the system retains that kind of information. But I think there's what you might call this point of consciousness, which starts to resonate in bodies when they become the right shape and have the right minds. Whatever that is, I think is simply something that starts to happen when the conditions are right. And when the conditions are wrong, it goes back into a sort of general field. So I don't think there's a moment at which you were born, and I don't think there's ever a moment at which you'll die. I think you became more conscious of what was happening, and as the death process begins to happen, you will become less conscious. And then your experience of what you begin to experience will simply start changing. As it did as you became conscious, your experience somewhere in the womb, your experience of life has altered so radically since the first moments you were conscious. And it will continue to do that, and I think you just simply pass through different phases of nature.